Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of the Future Me podcast for the 2021-22 school year. My name is Nina Stem. I am the district coordinator for the Gear Up College and Career Readiness Program at Vancouver Public Schools. And with me here today, I have Monica Santos-Pinacho from WSU Vancouver. She is a financial aid outreach counselor there, and she's here with us today to go over some financial aid basics. Real quick, I just wanted to give a brief definition of financial aid, which is basically money to pay for college or post-secondary education after high school. So any kind of training or college after high school. Financial aid can be in the form of scholarships, which is free money that you don't have to pay back, grants, which is also free money that you don't have to pay back, work study on college campuses, or student loans, which you do need to pay back. Filing financial aid applications in the state of Washington also is how you connect to your college-bound scholarship funds and the Washington College Grant, both of which are money that you do not have to pay back for college and are amazing resources that only the state of Washington has available to students. On that note, we're going to go into asking Monica a few questions and learn some things about financial aid. Monica, could you please explain the difference between the FAFSA and the WASPA?
Absolutely, and thank you, Nina, for having me here today. Well, FAFSA and WASPA, you kind of got a little glimpse of it in the terminology that Nina shared, but essentially they are the two applications that are available here for financial aid. Now, students, you should only complete one of these applications in order to be considered for all of the aid that you may be eligible for. Here's how you determine which of the two applications you should complete. The first one, and the one most of you will likely file, is the free application for federal student aid, more commonly referred to as the FAFSA. I'm hoping some of you have heard that term before, but if you haven't, now that is an important term to know. The FAFSA specifically is for students who are US citizens or eligible non-citizens. That means if you have your permanent residency or a green card, that's you file the FAFSA. Now, here in the state of Washington, we are very fortunate that we also have the Washington application for state financial aid, commonly referred to as WASPA. This one is for students who may be HB 1079 or DACA, or those who essentially cannot apply for FAFSA because of their immigration status. So the important takeaway from here is that you should only file one of these applications. You determine which one you're eligible for based on your citizenship status. And again, only file for one. Something that I will add to what Nina said earlier about why applying for financial aid is so important is that filing this application is the first step in order to see how much money you're eligible for, whether that be free money in the form of grants or scholarships, or self-help aid in the form of student loans or work study. Now, here in the state of Washington, I said we're fortunate to have a state need grant that is very generous. We, in fact, the state of Washington offers the largest grant for students in the entire United States. However, we also rank among the lowest in terms of students who actually file for financial aid. So while we have the most aid available to students, we also rank among the top five at the bottom, the top five, and actually the lowest five in terms of students who actually complete their financial aid application. So that's why it's so important that you file the application you're eligible for to see if there is any eligibility for you to get funding to help for school.
So what I hear you saying, Monica, is that Washington State students probably leave a lot of money on the table every year because we are not filling out our financial aid applications at a very high rate.
Absolutely.
The money is there to be had. Why is it important for students to complete a FAFSA or WASPA, even if they think they won't qualify for financial aid?
That's an excellent question. And I will just throw this misconception out the door right now and say that you, regardless of your income, regardless of your parents' income, you will be eligible for some form of financial aid. Now, how much you're eligible for obviously depends on your unique financial situation, your unique parent situation at home as well, especially for high school seniors like yourselves. Most of you will be considered dependent students, which means that you will need to submit your parent information on the financial aid application as well, regardless of whether you're filing the FAFSA or the WASFA. However, students will be eligible for some aid. Now, Nina mentioned there are 4 different types of aid, and at the very minimum, you will be eligible for loans. And then based on your individual financial situation, you may be eligible for free money. As of 2020, the state of Washington expanded the eligibility for that state need grant that I mentioned is the largest in the state. So now a lot more families are able to tap into that resource, but you will never know how much you're eligible for free money until you file your financial aid application, which, like Nina said, opens every year in October. And we recommend that you file in October if you can. It will open every single year. You will have to file your financial aid application every year that you're in college until you complete your post-secondary education. And it is important that you submit the application before the college or university's financial aid priority deadline to ensure that you do get any of the aid you may be eligible for. Priority deadlines vary from school to school. For example, WSU's priority deadline for new students, where you will fall into that category, that deadline is January 31st. And for those that are current students already, it's November 30th. So for most of you, that will be January 31st.
Thank you, Monica. I also just want to point out that there are quite a few schools who, even if your family would not qualify financially for student aid, the school would like those students to complete their FAFSA or their WASPA in order to be considered for scholarships, institutional scholarships, directly from that school. So even a merit-based scholarship that was based on student grades and not on a family's financial eligibility may still require that that student file a FAFSA or a WASPA in order to be considered for that scholarship. When completing the FAFSA or the WASPA, who needs to create an FSA ID or WASPA ID and sign the FAFSA?
Another really good question. So in order to complete and sign your application for financial aid, regardless of it's a FAFSA or a WASFA, you do need to create an ID account, and that is a username and a password. And if you're a first-time applicant, you'll need to create one of these accounts. Now, there are 2 portals, one for the FAFSA and one for the WASFA. But also, one thing I'll say before I talk about the 2 different portals is if you are a dependent student, you'll need a parent signature in order to submit your application. So one of your parents also needs to create either one of the IDs at one of the portals. So for example, if you're filing a FAFSA, you'll need to create an FSA ID, and you go to studentaid.gov and you create an account. You select create an account. You'll need your social security number, your personal email address, your mobile phone number, and your permanent address. Now, if you're filing a WASFA, you'll need to create a WASFA ID by going to wsac.wa.gov/WASFA, and you select the new user option. You'll need a personal email address, your mobile number, and now this is optional for students that file the WASFA. If you have a social security, a DACA, or an ITIN number, you can use that. But if you don't have it, totally fine. You just leave that question blank. and you move on.
Great. Thank you for clarifying all of that. Could you share some basic tips for families to help them avoid any issues with the FAFSA or being selected for verification?
This is a super important question, and verification is also such a great thing to know, because it is important for you to know how to make sure your file, your financial aid file at the university or college you're attending, is complete. The first step is to file the application, but the second step is to follow up with the college or university to make sure your financial aid file, not only that they received the financial aid information, but that your file is complete. The Department of Education, in order to ensure that financial aid offices around the United States are doing their jobs correctly, do have us select a number of students for verification. Now, we have to do this. It's a rule from the Department of Education. So oftentimes there is no way that you can stop that from happening. However, you can set yourself up for success. For example, pro tip number one, when you're creating your FAFSA ID, when you're filing your application, really recommend that you make sure your name is correctly spelled and correctly noted as it appears on your documents. Double check your name, double check that the spelling of your name. Some of us, I have two last names, so I have to make sure that if there's a space, there's a space. If there's a hyphen, there's a hyphen. That is very important. You want to make sure that your social security number is correct. You don't want to have a typo on that number at all. So double check it. Double check that your address is correct so that your information matches when the schools retrieve that information. Now, one thing as you're creating your FAFSA ID is right now you probably have a school issued email address. We recommend that you don't use that email address, because we need to make sure that you will have access to that email address after you graduate. So we recommend that if you don't have one, you create an email that is a non-school issued email. There are a lot of platforms out there like Yahoo or Gmail or Outlook and many more. So select one that you like and create an email for yourself. And if you're a dependent student, please do not use the same email on your ID as you will in your parents', okay? Some students share their emails, or they may have a family email that they use. Make sure that you are only using one email for yourself and a separate email for your parents, because an FSA ID can only be attached to one email. Same goes for the phone number. So that's very important to make sure there is no miscommunication. And then pro tip number 3, or just actually something for you to know, after you create your ID, your FSA ID or your WASPA ID, that information has to be verified. So sometimes it takes 1 to 3 days for it to be considered valid. And there are things that you can't do on the portal until that information is validated. So give it 1 to 3 days for that to go through. So create your ID first, and then go in and fill out the application.
Great, thank you. And finally, does WSUV have resources for families seeking assistance with completing financial aid applications, even if they're not planning to attend WSUV?
Absolutely. In fact, all of this information that we've walked through in this podcast is information that applies no matter where you're going to school, whether it's WSU or any other institution here in the state or out of the state. Financial aid information is nationwide. There is information that specifically applies to Washington students in order to receive the Washington State Need Grant, for example, the Washington College Grant. You have to be residing in Washington and going to a school in Washington, as you mentioned earlier, Nina. But there are a lot of other resources as well. I go to high schools and other community events throughout Southwest Washington, giving financial aid presentations, making folks aware of what financial aid is and how to apply. Here at the WSU Vancouver campus, we will be hosting a number of events over the next 2 months. First, College Go Washington is coming up, where you can come to the WSU Vancouver campus and get one-on-one help from financial aid counselors from Clark College and WSU to complete your FAFSA. You can register at vancouver.wsu.edu/CGW. Those events are coming up in November and December. We'll be hosting 3 evening events and 1 afternoon event. So if you still haven't done your FAFSA or your WASPA and you want help through that process, please come to one of these in-person events and we'd be happy to help you. Also, scholarships are super important, and there are a ton of scholarships out there to help support your education. On December 8th, we'll be hosting specifically a Scholarship 101 workshop on campus from 6 to 7 p.m. So a lot of help is available. This process can be pretty daunting, but there are people like myself, like Nina, across the community and at the colleges and universities who are here to help you through the process.
Thank you, Monica. So it's one of the things that I really appreciate about having WSU Vancouver and Clark College so close by to us. Both schools are really great partners for Vancouver Public Schools and for Evergreen Schools, making sure that our families have all of the resources that they need in order to be successful in whatever they choose to do after high school. And so it's really fantastic that we have so many resources in our communities for families. You can always go to any of the WSU Vancouver events. Clark College also has financial aid events that are open to any student in the area. And we also host at VPS in your school. You will have financial aid filing events on campus in your school that you can go to, usually in your career center. And if you have questions about that, you can just check with either your career specialist, your school counselor, or if you are at a Gear Up school, your Gear Up staff in your building will have all the information for all of the events that are happening at VPS or at either of our local colleges that are hosting events. So please make sure you, if you do require assistance with your financial aid application, please know there are resources out there and we are all here and happy to help because we do recognize that it is not always an easy process. And for some families that may be in unique situations, sitting down at home and just doing it on your own can feel quite intimidating. So just know that all of us who work in this area have a lot of information, have worked through a lot of unique situations and figured a lot of things out with families. So we have resources and ideas at our fingertips that you don't have just sitting at home working on your computer. So please access these resources that we have in our communities. Monica, thank you so much for joining us today on our podcast. I really appreciate your information and your partnership. And I hope our families come to some of the WSU Vancouver events. I've been to a few of them myself, and they are really fantastic resources. So thank you very much. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.